Hello everyone, welcome back to Streaming Alchemy. I'm John Mahoney, and on today's show, we're going to be taking a bit of a deep dive behind the scenes in VMix to look at how we could pull out information about a session and display that as really a production dashboard. So somebody in looking at one place could see everything that's going on in a production. So before we get to that, I want to invite everybody to please share any questions, any feedback you have, just post them in the comments, and we'll try to get to them here live on the show. All right, so as we look at this show, what I really want to focus on was the flexibility that VMix is going to provide us and gives us to really work with ourselves. So this isn't hacks, these are things that are standard features of VMix. And from the previous episode, we talked about the level of automation control that VMix provides. It also provides something called scripting, which will allow you to do more complex things, and something that's a real fundamental part about how VMix works overall, and we saw it in the use of the shortcuts, is the ability to call functions. And VMix has a whole web API that's structured around calling functions. So if I switch over here, you could take a look at, let me go here. So in VMix, they have a web interface they provide with a fixed URL that will allow you to control VMix through this web interface, basically buttons that you can have somebody press either with a mouse or a touch screen and switch all the functionality in VMix. Basically a simple interface for people that could be more intimidated by the full VMix interface. But what's really driving this is a whole web-based interface that VMix provides. And one of the things they provide in that is at a location called your local host with a specific port 8088 and /API. And now when you go to that site, what you are seeing is an XML description of everything that's going on in your VMix session. So anytime anything changes, that's getting reflected in the XML that VMix has underlying it. So you can see from here, it's very well structured XML, which covers all the things from versions and inputs to overlays, the state of recording and streaming, everything basically that's going on in your production. And XML, it's very intimidating when you look at it, but once you start to get into it, it becomes pretty straightforward. XML is just a way we have to describe data in a structured layout so that you can find things by basically following a set of named structures inside a single file. And so what we're going to do, the way we're going to leverage this is by doing something with VMix's own data source manager. So if I switch over to the VMix interface here and you go down to the little hamburger menu down here, you can click and it has a set of things you have access to, but the key one that we want to talk about here is Data Sources Manager. And what Data Sources Manager will let you do is take some external source and import it as data into VMix. So what we have with this page is a perfect data source, and it's an XML format. So by clicking on this plus, we're going to just create a new data source here. And the data source has a request for a URL or a file name. So if I had this XML data or other structured data in a file, I could just point VMix to look there. But if it's in this case, a web page, let me just copy that, now paste that in here. This now is connecting me to the XML file that VMix has talking about itself. So through this method, what I'm going to be able to do is find out information inside of VMix about what VMix is doing, and then we're going to package that up to create a new display. So the key in doing this, though, is you really want to understand. Oh, Dennis, hi, how are you? Welcome. You really want to understand what data you want to get out of this. So this URL is basically a huge dump. It's all the data about everything going on in VMix. So what we have to do is we have to tell VMix specifically where to look so it can come back and give us the data to a specific item inside of the interface. So that's using Xpath. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to jump out of this and we'll jump back in again. But let me show you, let me get out of this. Let me show you a bit about what we have here with Xpath. So if I switch this over here. So Peter, hello, welcome. So XML is basically this type of description you see here, where I have VMix and version number and edition and preset, then inputs. And what you'll notice is that it's really well structured. So inside of each section, I have brackets that say the section starts and then the section ends, like version, the version number, and then a slash version. That's telling me the structure of that row of data. The same with inputs. And now what you'll see with inputs which is down below preset here, is that there's one bracket which says inputs, plural, and then for each input inside of VMix, they have another whole key framework there, which describes everything about that input. So what Xpath, the line across the top, is going to let us do, it's going to give us a way to tell the data source manager in VMix where in this big XML file to look for the information we want. So in this example we're going to use, I'm going to be taking the data from whatever input we have in program, and we're going to display that as an overlay. So if you have a video up playing and out of program, you'll get to see everything you need to know about that video. So the way I set this up is that I go in following this XML path where I look at VMix, which was the top thing we see. That's the big bucket that everything is in. Everything's part of VMix. So then I'm saying, I want you to focus now on the inputs. So skip over everything on version, edition, and preset. We're going to focus now on inputs. And I want to focus on one input in particular. But the thing is, I can't tell it which one is in program because I don't know. So I have to ask it what one is in, what numbered input is inside of the program. And to do that, I'm actually posting an argument. And I'm saying, for the input, I want you to give me the data for input number that matches VMix active. And that's another part of this XPath now. Down here at the very bottom where it says active 3/active, that is the input in VMix that's currently in program out. So this now is giving me a method to ask VMix, give me all the data about this specific input, but the input is whichever input you happen to have in program. So this is what Xpath lets me do. It gives me this type of simple descriptor that actually embeds a lot of complexity behind it, where you're pulling data out from a dynamic structure and getting the right data all the time. So let me switch back here to what we have in VMix. So if I just come here and we'll go back into Data Sources Manager, let me open up one of the ones I have that say, let's get all the information we have about whatever guest is in the program. And we'll look at the settings here. So for that, I basically have exactly what we described in the look at the Xpath. We have the point to the URL, and now we have the full Xpath descriptor saying this is what I want, and I want it for whatever's in program. So if you look at this is what's being returned. So it's giving me a full row of data, essentially everything that was in the row for the input in program. So we have, internal things like a unique key, but we have the number of the input, what type, in this case, we're just using videos, the titles, short titles, the state of it. So all this information is now coming back to us. And this is something that we're going to be able to use to piece together the interface we want to create here. And everything basically is going to be driving off of this one data source. So how do we do this now? We've sort of looked at putting this, we now know how to identify the data we want. We looked at how to call that out. So the next thing we want to do is we want to actually have some framework for mapping that data into something visual. And that's where one of the other utilities that comes with VMix comes into play, and that's GT Title Designer. Now, I sort of apologize in advance because this is going to be a little difficult to see what I have here in the layout. But what's probably more important over here is basically the structure of this. I have items here that are all just text objects. So we have sort of what's the source, what's the state of the streaming, state of recording. All these items are here. So some of these are labels, but some of them are also just placeholders for data that we're going to use. So what I did is I created this, and you'll see it better when we get to the next section. I created this structure of all the different data elements we want and labels for it. And so this now gives me the visual framework to start to render those data sources into. So let's now jump to the meat of this. I actually have this overlay, which is, it's a GT Title Designer. So I saved it and I called this in as an input source. So let me go to the title editor, which is one of the ways that you actually map all this information. And now in the title editor, what you see are all of the labels that I had along the side of the GT Title Designer, all of the information all the text fields I put there. But what I want to do is map some of these text fields to actual data sources. So the way you do that is, if you look over here, let's just pick something that we have. So we'll look at media state. So that was something I had. If I go up to media state, I go in and it lets me now say, replace the text that I had in my GT Title Designer for media state with the data here. Format it exactly the way I had it in Title Designer, but replace it with this data. And so if you remember, when we set it up in data sources, we set up something called Program Guest. And in Program Guest, which is an XML file, we have whole sets of data in a full row of everything about the input that's in the program. So what this lets me do is I can come here and say, these are now all of the columns that were in that row of data, and I can pick whatever column I want to assign to that text field. And so now if you start to see the path we've worked, we've gone through the data, mapped the data as data sources, and then inside of GT Title Designer laid it out as a visual framework. And now in that visual framework, we are taking to the Title Designer and mapping specific data sources. So here we've done all of that for all of the data sources we want to do as an overlay. So I guess the next thing is to start to look at how do we pull this together. We have an overlay that has all this information that we pulled together. So since this is going to be something that we want to do as a backdrop for what's ever in program, we're going to create a MultiView here. So what the MultiView will let me do is it will let me show what's coming out of program and create space around that for other elements that I may want, like a backdrop. And in this case, I put in what's in preview, other things like that. So I have that sitting over here as my program monitor. So this is basically my program monitor is the layout that I'm going to use as an input for this whole cockpit I'm putting together. And as you can see, it's taking what's in the program output, scrunching it over to the side. It's put the production clock in there. It's actually also showing in a little thumbnail at the bottom what's in preview. And it has a framework, a layout for this. And I'm doing this through, jump into everything here. I basically have a MultiView set up where I'm taking different inputs and stacking them up to create this. Now, one of the things you will notice is that I'm pulling in program out, but that is not an input I can normally take. It's not one of the inputs that are available inside of VMix. So what I had to do to capture the program out was I had to go in and take it in as an NDI feed. So in the outputs for VMix, I have it set up to output 1 is program, and that's going out NDI. Output 2 is preview. And then the output 3 and 4 I have with an overlay and with this background, the stacked MultiView I have set up. So I'm sort of cheating by taking the program out from VMix, feeding it back in as a new input into VMix, and using that in the MultiView. So that's an easy way to access sources that are not necessarily published and available as inputs inside of VMix. So with that layout set up and these elements, what I now do is I now have a title that I can put over that. But here's the rub. The title, when you publish a title as an overlay, you can only use it on program out. So there's no way I could sort of route the title and make it this overlay of data, put that title into any other format inside of VMix other than what I'm sending program out, which kind of defeats the purpose because then I'm showing that to the audience. So what we can do though is we can use something that was actually baked into Studio Monitor, NDI Studio Monitor from NewTek. And so what we're going to do is we're going to feed this MultiView out. So let me switch over to, this is the output. So let me show you how we did it. We take and we can select a source, a specific source we want. So in this case, we're taking output 3 from VMix. And that is the core video you see here. But one of the cool things that Studio Monitor lets you do is you can also go down and in settings, take and set up an overlay. And so for the overlay, what I'm asking it to do is I'm taking output 4 from VMix, which is that GT title designer, and I'm putting that over this original MultiView input. So now I'm sending it out as alpha channel. So this whole thing now, the stream that created the overlay, the stream that created the stacked background with the program feed, that is now all available inside of Studio Monitor. And so now what I've done is I've taken these disparate elements inside of VMix and pushed them out into something that you can use in a production studio setting. And this can be anything that you really want now. I mean, we set this up with things around program, but it could be a special feedback monitor for remote guests. So you could set something up where I want to create something where they get some more status about what's going on. As long as the information is published inside of VMix, it's something you can use. The other thing, because you do have this issue with sort of how do you take and manage these types of overlays that you don't want to have showing up on your program out. One of the other features inside of Studio Monitor is that you can tell it to output video as well. So you can have it set itself up as a relay for any NDI feed it has. So this will now give you the ability to take this feed and potentially route it back into another system. Like say you're using LiveTear and you want this as a return or something as a return input for VMix call. Any of these things, you now have the ability to take the output from Studio Monitor, this great composite, and feed that back in. So I know this was a bit of a technical deep dive, but I am hopeful that you found this useful. We've really covered everything here that we wanted to cover, but I know we just really touched the surface of what's possible here. So we'll be hanging around after the show if you want to, jump on and chat or have any other questions about this or anything video production. But this is going to be a wrap for today's show, and we'll be diving in a lot more into the technical aspects of VMix, especially as we go more into automation on our side. We'll share everything we learned from that with you as well for scripting and other things. So if you can't stay around for the after show, thank you very much for joining us, and I'll hopefully see all of you for the next show, which will be next Friday, same social channels, same time. So why not use different overlays and exclude them in output? So what we wanted to do when we set this here is, and there may be a better way to do this, so we're always happy to learn, Peter. So thank you for jumping in. We needed some way to force this out as a framework. So that's why we did this as a composite externally. And we'll certainly dive a little deeper, but we wanted to find some way that would let us create a source that could be published inside a production space. So this is something as NDI that multiple people could pull up, or that you could then repurpose. So that was the thinking behind the way we did it, and the fact you have the overlay inside of Studio Monitor, we thought was a great way to combine the two. But if there is something we could do inside of VMix itself, we'll certainly take a look at that. But we didn't think there was a way to do that. But VMix is an incredibly flexible tool, so we're always learning something new with that as well. But so Axafilm, thank you for joining us. I just see you posted. So this is a general. It's not really a tool per se. It is a general approach to working with data inside of VMix. So hopefully you'll come up with some wild and creative things yourselves that you'll be able to share with the group. So Peter, thank you. I'm gonna have to look into that, but that would be that would definitely be something that I will take a look at how we could do. So thank you. So all right, everyone. So we'll hang around after the show and chat or do whatever. And until then, we'll see everybody next week if you can't be there. Take care, guys. Thanks. Hi, everyone. So thank you. Peter, if you're still there, thank you very much for, suggesting, another way to do this. So I'll definitely look into this. And if there's something that I could do, Jawad, thank you. I appreciate you joining. If there's something different that we could have done here, we'll definitely, follow up with this on the page and probably in the Streaming Alchemy group, and let everybody know, your suggestion here. But that is definitely another interesting approach. And like I said, VMix is incredibly flexible, so there's never just one way to do this. But hopefully, hopefully, as a general principle, the key things that we talked about here, though, will be useful. And like one of the things that there were even people that we had here that weren't aware that Studio Monitor lets you put in overlays. So that's something you could use. So for instance, if you want to be able to show people like a confidence monitor, but put a clock up so they know how much time, if it's a countdown, or if they're doing a presentation, you could do that sort of stuff with Studio Monitor without having to burn that into the one video source coming out. So there could be some interesting things that you can use sort of around what we showed here. But I think once you get into sort of the VMix mindset for how they expose things, you come up with just new, fun ways to do a lot of very powerful things, like incredibly powerful. Can be very challenging sometimes because you can get a little hacky with scripting and some automation, but by and large, if you needed to get something done, you could probably figure out a way to do it inside of VMix. So, does anybody have any questions, whether about what we just did, or whether it's on anything else video related? I'd be happy to try and answer them anyway, and see what we can come up with. So I know we have a bit of a lag between me talking and you seeing it on the stream. So we'll hang around a bit. But the other thing, let me see if I can just share this for a second. I mean, one of the things that I mentioned when we were talking about how everything works with the web API that VMix has is inside here, and it's a little difficult to see, but this is an example of the web API. You have the ability to call that API page and then as an argument say, I want to use this function with these specific variable sets, so the arguments for the function. And this allows you to do things that, from an automated point of view, that if you can do it through a shortcut in VMix, you can do it through the web API. And the web API is kind of the foundation to the simplest type of scripting you can do, where you can just put multiple web API calls and delays between them and bundle those as scripts. So, this is really, just the start point for us about different things we can do with scripting. And yes, Peter's saying the dynamic variables in VMix 24. I think dynamic variables it's one of those things where people go, so what? But once you see what you're going to be able to do with dynamic variables, I agree with you, Peter. That's going to be a real game changer for automation and the types of things you can do with that. So what dynamic variables are going to let you do is what I was trying to do here was I was trying to say, take whatever's in program and pull all the information out about what's in program. And dynamic variables are going to give you that same kind of thing where you can come back and say, I'm going to tell you what input to do all this stuff to. And I can change the input dynamically. So I don't have to make different shortcuts. I can simply say, select an input and then apply something to whatever that selected input is. So you're going to get, and that's just sort of the brief view of it. But you're going to get now the ability to do much more powerful automation and much simpler automation scripting, because now you can logically break things out as opposed to repeating the same thing with one small change, 10 times for everything you need to do. Richard, thanks for joining us. It's always great to see you. So this is, this again is just a start point for all of us, and we're pretty excited about what we're gonna be doing with VMix going forward. It is incredibly detailed and a lot to learn, but from an automation point of view, I think once you're into scripting and once you really can master that and sort of have variable routes and sort of conditional logic, that's where we're getting to. We're trying to learn all of that. Peter, he says, yes, he'd love to use the VMix panel builder. Yes, which again uses the APIs. So I think the openness of VMix is going to allow us to do a lot of stuff. The fact is that all of this stuff is HTTP based. So it would be very easy to do this through HTTP request inside of Stream Deck, or through something like Central Control, where you could actually be doing some of these things and even getting this information feedback. So possibly creating, some more dynamic scripting as well, through external tools. So yeah, I mean, VMix Panel Builder is just one example, but I think you're going to be able to do a lot more yourself as well, and just sort of put together custom UIs for things, whether it's through third-party products or, Peter, I love Central Control. We use it here for doing a lot of stuff, and again, that's something that has more depth to it. So I think as we get into as you get into automation, these things all start to interact, and you start to think of how could I use this control to trigger this action, which has its own sequence of events behind it. So I mean, the other thing that central control gives, which is phenomenal, is it actually works with control surfaces. So we just got in a Behringer X-Touch, which we're going to be using specifically to work around audio with this, and we'll do a show on our experience with that. But the fact you can do that and tie this all together inside VMix, and also do this for wherever VMix is. So if you deployed VMix up to AWS and you're doing something that's a pure remote production, the same sorts of things apply here. So now I could actually take and use central control and a touch surface to control audio levels on a VMix that's up in AWS, or possibly on two, one local and one in AWS, and just map the different controls. So very cool stuff that you're going to be able to do. But again, all this comes back to just the openness, the fact a tool gives you this level of control. So, all right, so is there anything else anybody wants to talk about here? So, because this is fun. I mean, I love talking about automation and different things you can do. So this is definitely be something that we're very cool on. Yeah, controlling lights in the room. Yep. So this is a this is another thing. I mean, once you get into this, I mean, all the automation. I know that can be done with, I believe, HTTP request. So there's something else. I mean, let me since we're informal here, let me just pull this out. We're going to be doing a look at the new PTZ Optics web control PTZ controller, the SuperJoy, and one of the things they put into here is the ability to issue HTTP request dynamically to an IP address. So that would mean you could do things like change lighting, like you mentioned, Peter, where you could change lighting in a room based on a button push that could also trigger things that would position a camera or position multiple cameras simultaneously. So definitely some cool stuff as you put this together. And that's what I meant. There's a lot more of these types of control interfaces, coming out, and people are baking a lot more capabilities into the surfaces that already exist. So definitely something that would be cool, where you basically press a button and just sit back and the show will happen. So we're not quite there, but that's definitely could be, it can be a lot of fun where you get to be much more creative, and it becomes less about the mechanical process of doing something. And because you have enough automation, you can start to think more about the artistic process. So even something as simple as slightly dimming or raising lights based on where a camera was pointing. So if you had backlights and front lights, you could turn around and say, when I point a camera at a podium, I want to dim the backlights so I don't get the flare, but I want to raise the front lights to make sure I have great signal coming into my camera. So things like that. Yeah, I mean, red light is on air, all these things, just the ability to sit there and go, I can now think more creatively and get a better image out because I'm not so worried about all the mechanical steps that I need to do. So that is really exciting. I mean, all the tools that are out and everything that's happened. I mean, for the tough time that 2020 was for so many people, it pushed us to do a lot more with less, and it also pushed us to do a lot more with automation, with remote productions, which meant we had to have more of these tools, these hands-off tools, to do things. So. But Peter's point, doing like tally lights and other things. There are a lot of great, tally solutions out there, and the ability to integrate all of those as well for different types of things, especially when you're dealing with people remotely. I mean, having a tally on a remote guest that they would be able to see whether that's a physical or a virtual tally, so they know when they're in a live on-air shot. Those things could be great as well, because I know it is very difficult for people that are participating in productions remotely. So that was part of the thinking we had here when we set this up, was how could you create better displays back to remote guests so they would know what was going on. So if, for instance, you had 4 guests and you could turn around and do something where when every guest's mic was muted or unmuted, you could see a color indicator in a circle with their picture in it. I mean, these are the sorts of things you can start to do, especially with things like scripting. What we showed today with just pulling the data out, it was kind of raw data. We were just pulling out what was ever in the XML. But with scripting, I could take and say, well, if mute was equal to true, then display this image around this image. And that could be something that we sort of feed back into GT Title Designer to say, use a different image and sort of make changes there. So really cool stuff where it moves beyond just being tally lights as I'm on air, off air, but now much more detailed. Is your mic hot? Or is it not? Are you part of a multi-view or are you part of a single full shot? So different things that we could give as feedback to remote guests. And I think that would make people feel, A, more comfortable, but B, also more engaged, more part of the production, and simulate to a certain extent the physical experience of being present in a studio with other people. So very excited about all this stuff. So as I guess you can tell, we got a lot of plans in here and a lot of things we definitely want to talk about. So. All right, everyone. So hopefully we covered everything, about this to, at least to a clear level. And if you have any questions or follow-up, just post them in the group. And I'm looking at the group all the time, so I'd be happy to jump in and share the sessions, share XML, anything that would be helpful. Just ask, and we'll try to take care of it here. So, but I guess that's everything for this week. I want to thank all of you for hanging around and for spending the time. It's really something I don't take for granted. I appreciate everybody making the time on Fridays to spend with us here. So thank you very much, and I'll see you all next week. Take care. Have a good one.